Realizing that getting Kabelo was proving to be an impossible task, Zandile decided to change his strategy. He pretended to be over Kabelo and began showing support for Tato and Kabelo's relationship. To make her act more convincing, she even started a relationship with another guy, a charming yet naive student named Sipho. Their relationship quickly turned physical, as Zandile was someone who found little difficulty in becoming sexually involved. With a false facade securely in place, Zandile devised a devious plan. She invited Kabelo and Tato to a small, intimate dinner at her apartment, claiming she wanted to celebrate their friendship and newfound happiness. Her real intent was far from celebratory. As the evening progressed, Zandile, ever the gracious hostess, served drinks and kept the conversation light. She waited for the right moment and then subtly slipped a sedative into their drinks. It didn't take long for Tato to start feeling the effects, her eyelids growing heavy. "Tato, you look tired," Zandile said, feigning concern. "Why don't you go lie down on your bed? Kabelo and I will finish up here." Tato, too drowsy to argue, mumbled a thank you and stumbled to her bedroom, where she passed out almost immediately. Kabelo, on the other hand, fell into a half-asleep, half-awake state. His mind was foggy, and he struggled to keep his eyes open. Zandile seized the chance. She led him to her own bedroom, took off his clothes, and took her clothes off as well, creating the scene she had envisioned. She crawled under the blankets next to him, hoping against hope that he would become intimate with her. But Kabelo, even in his drugged state, maintained some control. Disappointed, Zandile settled for merely lying naked beside him. The next morning, as the first rays of the sun filtered through the curtains, Tato woke up in her room, still wearing the clothes from the day before. Unsteadily, she walked towards Zandile's room to find out what happened to Kabelo the night before. She opened the door and froze in horror at the sight before her. Kabelo and Zandile were lying naked in bed. A wave of betrayal washed over Tato, and she struggled to process what she was seeing. Her mouth opened, but for a moment no sound came out. Finally she screamed, "Kabelo, how could you?" Tato's voice trembled with a mix of hurt, anger, and deep disappointment. Startled, Kabelo woke up and quickly realized the situation. His eyes widened in shock as he registered his surroundings and the presence of Tato. Next to him, Zandile lay with an evil grin on her face. "Tato, it's not what it looks like," Kabelo shouted, scrambling to cover himself and get out of bed. He hadn't consented to any of this, and the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. But Tato wasn't listening. Tears streamed down her face as she turned and ran out of the room. Kabelo hurriedly dressed and ran after her, but Tato had already disappeared, leaving him to shout her name futilely down the empty hallway. "Tato, please, I need to explain," Kabelo shouted, his voice echoing the empty corridor. He frantically sent her texts explaining how Zandile had tricked him and that he had no control over what had happened. "Tato, it wasn't my fault. I swear I didn't do anything with her. Please believe me," read one message. "Tato, please talk to me. We need to sort this out. I love you," read another. But Tato read the messages and ignored them, her heart too broken to respond. She sought solace in the student accommodation office and requested a new roommate. Within a few days, she moved in with a humble girl named Lerato from Mafikeng, a staunch Christian who shared Tato's values and beliefs about waiting until marriage. Tato found a comforting connection with Lerato, and together they supported each other through their studies and personal lives. Despite deep feelings for Kabelo, Tato decided to forget about him, focusing instead on her dreams and faith in God. Zandile's plan had succeeded in driving a wedge between Kabelo and Tato, but the true test of their love was only beginning. Tato's journey was now one of healing, self-discovery, and perhaps a deeper understanding of forgiveness. The future lay uncertain for Kabelo, who was determined to prove his innocence and win back Tato's trust. Will Tato and Kabelo find a way back to each other, or has Zandile's treachery irrevocably shattered their bond?
The vibrant hum of university life continued unabated around Tato and Kabelo, yet each was enveloped in their separate storms. Rumors buzzed through the campus like pesky flies. Zandile, with a malicious hint in her eye, had wasted no time spreading rumors about Kabelo. "Oh, Kabelo was wild in bed," she whispered to everyone who would listen. Her false tales spread quickly, stinging Tato's heart whenever she heard them. She walked through the campus with her head held high, relying on prayer and her studies to shield her from the hurtful rumors. Meanwhile, Sipho, who had genuinely fallen for Zandile, seethed with pain and anger. He thought he had pleased her in every way possible, only to find she had used him. His anger brewed silently, his heart a twisted knot of betrayal and heartbreak. Kabelo, devastated by Tato's departure and the whispered lies, plunged into depression. His grades slipped and he failed his semester. The thought of returning to his parents, who were still under the false impression that everything was perfect, was unbearable. One afternoon, desperate for some kind of relief, he stumbled into the student counseling department. The counselor, a kind and patient man named Mr. Dube, listened intently to Kabelo's story. "Kabelo, it sounds like you're carrying an enormous burden, but you're not alone. Seeking help is the first step in healing." Still, the weight on Kabelo's heart was heavy, and healing seemed distant. His roommate, a jovial and kind student named Tabang, decided to intervene. "Hey Kabelo," Tabang said one Sunday morning, "why don't you join me for campus church today? It might help clear your mind." Kabelo hesitated but agreed. The warmth of the church's community and the service brought him a small glimmer of peace. Every Sunday, Kabelo found himself returning slowly, rebuilding his shattered spirit. Tato, in a new and humble room with Lerato, sought refuge in faith. Lerato, a gentle soul with dark curly hair that she often tied back, listened compassionately as Tato poured out her heart.
"Lerato, I don't know what to believe anymore. I miss Kabelo, but these rumors are breaking me," Tato confided. "Tato," Lerato said gently, "it sounds like Zandile may have drugged you and Kabelo. But remember, you both decided to wait until marriage, and I believe Kabelo would honor that. Let's speak with Pastor David. He can guide us." Together they approached Pastor David, a tall man with a reassuring presence and kind eyes. His church was modest, but filled with light, a beacon of hope on campus. "Pastor David,"
Tato began nervously,
Lerato and I need your counsel. After listening to their story, Pastor David nodded thoughtfully. Tato, Kabelo sounds like a good young man. If he pledged to wait until marriage, and Zandile's story seems to be filled with lies, it's likely he'll stay true to his word. This reminds me of the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife in the Bible. It's like a similar case to that story. Those words struck Tato deeply, filling her with a tentative hope. Meanwhile, Zandile had faced a new reality. She was pregnant. Viewing her pregnancy as a threat to her plan, she schemed to use it to her advantage. She began stalking Kabelo's mother on social media, following and studying her every move. Zandile sat in a small, tastefully decorated apartment in Johannesburg, her excitement barely contained as she focused on her laptop on the desk. The walls were painted soft pink, adorned with trendy art pieces reflecting a sparkling personality. She had spent the last few days meticulously studying Peggy Motsepe's social media accounts, analyzing her posts and observing her lifestyle. Zandile knew that Mrs. Motsepe loved status and the glitz of an affluent life, a trait that resonated with her own upbringing in a privileged household. She felt a surge of confidence as she clicked on Mrs. Motsepe's latest post featuring a lavish brunch spread glimmering with sparkling mimosas and delicate pastries. Zandile began liking several of Peggy's posts, leaving comments that flattered her taste and style. "Such a beautiful brunch. I love how you keep your family so close," she typed, her fingers dancing over the screen, knowing that this was just the beginning of her plan. After days of casual engagement, Zandile finally crafted a direct message. "Hi, Mrs. Motsepe. I've heard so much about your son, Kabelo. Would love to chat about him sometime." At first, her messages went unnoticed, ignored by Mrs. Motsepe, who was preoccupied with the intricacies of her own privileged life. But then, one message caught her eye, sparkling a flicker of interest. Kabelo's new girlfriend. "That's interesting," Mrs. Motsepe thought, intrigued. She quickly followed Zandile back and began to investigate her profile. Upon viewing her posts, Mrs. Motsepe concluded that Zandile came from some affluence herself. "Tell me about your family, Zandile," Mrs. Motsepe typed. "Oh, my dad has a successful business. We've always had a good lifestyle," Zandile replied, sensing Mrs. Motsepe's interest. "Well, we must meet," Mrs. Motsepe insisted, her tone almost motherly. "I would love to know more about you." Weeks later, having nurtured this new connection, Mrs. Motsepe traveled to Johannesburg for a meeting. They then agreed to meet at a chic restaurant called the Jewel Room, known for its elegant ambience and gourmet cuisine. The restaurant was adorned with modern art pieces and low-lit chandeliers, giving it a classy yet intimate feel. Zandile waited for Mrs. Motsepe at a table in the corner, nervously adjusting her trendy dress. She wore a red flowing sundress that accentuated her slim figure and highlighted her bright smile, capturing the attention of nearby diners. When Mrs. Motsepe arrived, dressed in a white lace dress and expensive-looking accessories, Zandile rose to greet her. "Mrs. Motsepe, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," she beamed, her voice dripping with sweetness. Zandile, my dear, I see you even more beautiful in person, Mrs. Motsepe replied warmly, taking a seat. Tell me more about yourself. As they exchanged pleasantries, Zandile could see the admiration in Mrs. Motsepe's eyes. It was the perfect opportunity to execute her plan. Actually, there's something important I need to share with you, Zandile said, though her heart raced with anticipation. What is it? Mrs. Motsepe leaned forward, sensing the seriousness in Zandile's tone. I'm pregnant with Kabelo's child, Zandile said, her voice trembling slightly, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. He left me when I told him. Mrs. Motsepe gasped, her expression shifting from warmth to concern. What do you mean he left you? Yes, Zandile continued, crafting a story with care. I was so afraid to tell him, and when I did, he panicked and broke things off. I just wanted you to know because I hope you can talk to him. I feel so lost. I will talk to my son, Mrs. Motsepe said, her heart racing. I need to protect my family. Deep inside, she felt a mix of admiration and anxiety at this news, believing this girl may indeed be her future daughter-in-law. After finishing lunch, Mrs. Motsepe returned to Botswana with a sense of urgency to set things right. Meanwhile, Kabelo's younger sister, Kitso, a smart and curious 15-year-old girl with bright eyes and a love for mischief, texted her brother. Hey, I just heard something really strange about Zandile. Mom is all over it. What happened to Tato? Kitso messaged. What are you talking about? Kabelo replied, irritation evident in his tone. Apparently, she's claiming that she's pregnant with your baby and you left her. Kitso's eyes widened as she sent the message. Kabelo scoffed at this. That's complete rubbish. I never slept with her. She's lying. His voice was filled with frustration as he paced his small dorm room, running his fingers through his hair. The news drove his anger higher, knowing Zandile had manipulated in such a vile way. Zandile, completely unaware of the repercussions of a plan, felt a thrill as she murmured to herself, things are finally falling into place. On the other side of town, Tato sat in a simple dorm room, reflecting on a broken relationship with Kabelo. Her pale green walls were adorned with pictures of Botswana landscapes, a reminder of her roots. As she sat at her desk with a textbook open, her thoughts drifted away from her studies. Memories of Kabelo flashed through her mind, the laughter they shared, the dreams they built together, the promises they made. Lerato, her roommate, noticed Tato's distracted gaze and walked over, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Hey, Tato, I know this is hard, but you must remember what the pastor said. I know, Lerato. I just can't help but think about the good in Kabelo. It hurts to think he might not feel the same about me anymore, Tato said, a lump forming in her throat. In the midst of their struggles, a campus prayer evening event was announced on their university's bulletin board. Both Tato and Kabelo decided separately to attend, not specifically for each other, but for their own individual healing from the chaos surrounding them. As the evening unfolded, the atmosphere in the chapel was electric. The air was serene with worship, creating an environment ripe for personal reflection and connection with God. Students scattered throughout sat with bowed heads,
some swaying gently as they sang praise to their creator. Kabelo, lost in emotional song, suddenly turned, catching sight of Thato sitting a few rows in front of him. She looked beautiful, with a glowing brown skin, wearing a simple yet elegant dress that flowed gently as she moved. Memories of their laughter and shared moments cascaded over him like a warm blanket. He felt a pull towards her that transcended the hurt, urging him to reconnect. In that moment, Thato felt a stirring in her heart. It was as if God himself was urging her to forgive Kabelo, as he, God himself, had forgiven her. She closed her eyes and prayed earnestly for understanding and clarity. God, please show me what to do. I miss Kabelo, but I don't understand everything that's going on, she whispered. The presence of divine anointing filled the hall, cascading like a wave over the congregation. Feeling the urgency and sanctity of the moment, Thato fell to her knees, crying softly for direction and strength, leaving her burden before God. Simultaneously, Kabelo found himself caught in the same current of emotion. As he prayed, a sense of enlightenment washed over him, urging him to fight for what he knew in his heart had to be true: his love for Thato. While they prayed, the noise of the world outside faded, and the two hearts in turmoil began to find their way back to each other. Unbeknownst to them, the situations surrounding them were set to intertwine once more, pulling them into a collision course of truth, love, and redemption that would truly test the bonds they had built. Through tears and cries, both Thato and Kabelo strove to reach for forgiveness, for clarity, and most importantly for each other. What lay ahead would challenge them, yet it would also pave the way for healing, trust, and perhaps a renewed relationship built on stronger foundations. Do you think Thato and Kabelo will work things out? And do you think Zandile will be or will not be in the picture? Well, in order to find out, please check out our next upload and know that I appreciate you.
Hello, creative thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to Untold Stories. I appreciate you so much because it is you who inspire me to tell more of these untold stories. Kindly please share your thoughts on what you learned or felt from the story down below in the comments section. And do not forget to like, share, and if you have not subscribed, please do so. And thank you, and see you on the next upload. Till next time, bye bye.
Stay tuned and find out how their intertwining paths reveal love's resilience amidst tribulation.